This is exactly how I would rise from the routine of a 9-to-5 existence to building a fortune of my own, not merely through money, but through mastery. Mastery of power, mastery of time, mastery of myself. Machiavelli once wrote that fortune is a woman, and if you wish to control her, you must treat her boldly. He wasn't talking about luck. He was describing audacity. The courage to stop obeying and start commanding. I understand this now. Because I once lived the obedient life, I earned a modest salary. I followed instructions. I waited my turn. I waited for approval. I waited for permission. And while everything looked stable from the outside, inside, I was drowning in quiet resentment. Every day under fluorescent lights felt like a slow erosion of identity. Not dramatic enough to revolt, but painful enough to hollow me out. The moment everything changed was the moment I stopped waiting for fortune to favor me and decided to seize her. If I could return to that version of myself, trapped behind a desk, comforted by a predictable paycheck, I wouldn't tell him to quit his job. I'd tell him something far more dangerous. I'd tell him to change his psychology, because the first step toward wealth has nothing to do with income. A man's wealth is a reflection of his chosen skill, his weapon in the arena of life. Machiavelli called this virtue, not morality, not kindness, but the ability to impose your will upon uncertain circumstances. In our age, that means identifying your Machiavellian skill, the discipline or craft that gives you leverage over others. Yes, go to work, pay your bills, survive, but study the work that multiplies power. So here's exactly what I would do. I would open my mind like a strategist. I would go to Google, our modern Florence library, and I would type, professions of millionaires. What appears is predictable. Entrepreneurs, investors, lawyers, engineers, financiers, creators. Most people skim that list. A strategist does not skim. He builds a grid. Across the top, interest. Down the side, competence. Where curiosity and capability overlap, you find your first seat of power. When I did this years ago, I saw the truth clearly. I lacked patience for engineering. I lacked credentials for law. And I lacked the obedience required to climb corporate ladders. So I turned toward entrepreneurship, not because it was glamorous, not because it was easy, but because it was the fastest path to sovereignty, like a prince taking a crumbling castle and deciding to rebuild it in his own image. I wanted control, even if it meant risk, but this path demands a brutal decision. Isolation. You cannot build an empire surrounded by peasants. Machiavelli warned that a ruler's downfall often begins with poor alliances. I learned this the hard way. When I first announced I was building my own business, I expected encouragement. What I received was mockery. My friends laughed. They doubted. They dismissed. Not because they hated me, but because my ambition threatened their comfort. I would talk passionately about ideas, books, plans scribbled late at night. They would change the subject, gossip, television, distractions. That was the moment I realized something painful. My growth had made me a foreigner in my own circle. It wasn't personal. It was biological. Evolution rewards adaptation and punishes attachment to the familiar. So I withdrew. It was lonely, but that loneliness became the crucible. Every man who seeks greatness must experience exile before ascension. Napoleon was exiled before becoming emperor. Machiavelli wrote Times, the Prince Times, while banished from Florence. Stripped of power, yet his exile created ideas that outlived kings. Your separation from mediocrity is the same test. The weak call it loneliness. The strong call it preparation. Here's the truth no one tells you. Your energy is finite, and your circle consumes it. Every conversation misaligned with your future weakens your command over it. The poor drag you into despair disguised as realism. The mediocre mock ambition to rationalize their failure. You must guard your mind, like a prince guards a fortress. Gates closed, walls reinforced. When I cut off those who ridiculed my ambitions, I didn't just lose friends. I gained silence. Focus, mental space, a vacuum I could finally fill with strategy, knowledge, and power. And once the noise disappeared, my own voice returned. I stopped thinking like an employee and started thinking like a ruler, planning his first conquest. But Machiavelli issues a warning. Isolation without guidance breeds delusion. Once you remove the weak, you must replace them with the powerful. Power transfers through proximity, not through luck, through imitation. Whoever you stand beside long enough, you eventually become. So the next move is strategic replacement. Replace your broke friends with rich teachers. The average man seeks validation from those beneath him. It's easier to be admired than corrected. The ambitious man seeks counsel from those who sharpen his mind like a blade. Your environment is no longer just your neighborhood. It's what you consume, who you follow, whose language you adopt. I made a list. 10 names, not celebrities. Strategists, men who had already built what I wanted in the Renaissance. Ambitious men apprenticed under masters. They learned skills, temperament, restraint. The Medici didn't just build wealth. They engineered dynasties. Today, the breadcrumb trail still exists. Systems, psychology, patterns, but Machiavelli warns us. Admiration without transformation is worship. Do not study to become a fan. Study to become a rival. I never imagined sitting beside my mentors. I imagined surpassing them. That shift awakens the predator. The powerful stop looking like gods and start looking like men who simply played the game longer. That's how I studied modern elites. How Bezos thinks in decades, how Buffett defines patience, how Musk uses debt as a weapon. Wealth is not earned, it's engineered. The wise act immediately. The foolish hesitate. Now let's talk about time. Machiavelli warned that idleness is the ally of decay. Your mornings, nights, and weekends are not for recovery. They are for preparation. The common man scrolls. The ruler studies. I turned my life into an academy. Podcasts while driving. Audiobooks in the gym. Notes everywhere. Every spare moment either compounds or corrodes your future. But information alone is useless without targets. A prince governs toward conquest, not vague ambition. Define your realm, business, media, real estate. Focus builds momentum. Momentum builds authority. And authority is currency. Eventually, you must step into the arena. Power congregates in physical spaces. Once it was courts and salons, now it's conferences and masterminds. Entry requires investment, not flattery. Investment, this is where thinkers separate from builders. You cannot hoard your way to wealth. You must deploy. Machiavelli called debt a weapon, a calculated gamble. Revolution demands risk. The question is not, can you afford to act? It's, can you afford not to? When ambition outgrows your wallet, you face the test. Hesitation or transformation. The masses freeze. The prince advances. Money is not security. It is weaponry. Comfort destroys conquest. I remember my first major investment in myself. $4,000, no safety net. Fear was loud, but stagnation was louder. Fortune favors the bold. Necessity breeds greatness. Burn the ships, and domination becomes the only direction. Get into rooms that stretch you financially. Not because they guarantee riches, but because they force evolution. In those rooms, you don't listen to words. You observe behavior. Who commands attention? Who speaks rarely but precisely? Who controls without volume? Before every event, I prepared value. Movement earns respect. Potential does not. And once inside, you don't meet everyone. You identify trajectory changers, research, dossiers, preparation. You're not there to be liked. You're there to be remembered. But proximity alone isn't power. Persuasion is, Machiavelli called it, ruling minds. Every empire begins as a pitch. If you cannot sell, you will always serve those who can. Sales is not manipulation. It is understanding desire and positioning yourself as the bridge. Men are driven by love or fear. The committed voice commands, the uncertain voice begs. Once I believed fully in my value, everything changed. Then came precision. Wealth is mathematical. $1 million is simply a daily number. Reverse engineer it, track it, measure it. What gets measured gets conquered. Resistance will come. Fatigue, doubt, rejection. Most quit, not because it's hard, but because they forget why. This is where hunger matters. Look at the gap between who you are and who you could be. Feel it? That tension is life. The weak call it failure. The strong call it fuel. Comfort is the enemy. Wealth is not money. It is mastery. Do not worship fortune. Use her. And if you want to learn how to turn hunger into dominion, watch the next video. Because the next law of wealth is not about money at all. It's about control. The final laws of power, control, and strategic wealth. If part one was about awakening, then this part is about consolidation. Because power is not won in a single strike. It is secured, defended, and expanded. Machiavelli understood this better than most. Many men rise quickly, few remain standing. The reason is simple. They confuse momentum with permanence. Once you gain leverage, your next responsibility is defense. A prince who expands without fortifying invites destruction. In wealth, this means one thing. You must build systems that outlive motivation. Motivation is emotion. Emotion fades. Systems remain. When my income first began to grow, the greatest danger wasn't failure. It was ego. Suddenly, opportunities multiplied. Ideas arrived daily. Confidence surged. And that's when many men lose discipline. They spend before securing. They celebrate before stabilizing. They believe fortune is loyal. Machiavelli warned against this illusion. Fortune is not faithful. She tests. So the next law is restraint. A ruler does not expand everywhere. He consolidates where he dominates. This is where most ambitious men fracture. They chase multiple paths, multiple businesses, multiple identities. But power concentrates. Choose one domain and dominate it so thoroughly that your name becomes associated with authority. When people hear your name, they should associate certainty, not potential, not experimentation. Certainty. That is how trust compounds. And trust is leverage. Once revenue stabilized, I did something counterintuitive. I slowed down, not externally, internally. I stopped reacting and started planning in seasons. Machiavelli believed a prince must prepare in peace for inevitable war. Translated today, your calm periods are for building defenses, cash reserves, redundant income streams, legal protection, reputation, insurance. Because when chaos arrives, and it always does, you do not want to be building while under fire. Which leads to the next truth: visibility attracts attack. The moment you rise above the crowd, you become a target. Criticism intensifies, competitors emerge. People you've never met form opinions about you. This is where emotional control becomes power. The weak react publicly. The strong respond strategically, or not at all. Machiavelli advised rulers to appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, while privately remaining flexible, not hypocritical, strategic. You do not owe transparency to those who have no stake in your survival. Privacy is power. Silence is armor. As your influence grows, learn this discipline. Not every thought must be spoken. Not every insult must be answered. Not every battle must be fought. Victory is choosing the terrain. Another mistake men make at this stage is mistaking money for independence. Money alone is fragile. Influence is resilient. You must convert income into influence. How? Ownership, equity, assets, audience. Renting your life through wages is submission. Owning distribution is sovereignty. Whether it's media, platforms, products, or intellectual property, your long-term objective is simple: control access. Those who control access control outcomes. This is why creators, investors, and founders dominate modern wealth. They are not paid for labor. They are paid for positioning. Once I understood this, my decisions changed. I stopped asking, how much does this pay? And started asking, what does this control? If it gave me leverage, I pursued it. If it trapped me in dependency, I rejected it. This is the mental shift from earner to ruler. Now, let's talk about loyalty. Machiavelli famously said, "It is safer to be feared than loved." If you cannot be both, but fear does not mean cruelty. It means consequence. In modern life, this applies to boundaries. Your time, energy, and attention must have cost. If people can waste them freely, they will. If access to you is scarce, it becomes valuable. I learned to say no without explanation. I learned to walk away without guilt. And in doing so, my respect increased. Not because I demanded it, but because power respects clarity. As your circle evolves, you must continually assess alignment. Not everyone who helped you rise should stay near the throne. Some are builders. Some are companions. Some are anchors. Machiavelli warned that old alliances often become liabilities. This is not betrayal. It is evolution. You honor the past without living inside it. Another critical law at this stage is narrative control. Every powerful man is misunderstood. Your job is not to correct everyone. Your job is to define the story that matters. The public narrative, the market narrative, the investor narrative. Confusion weakens authority. Clarity strengthens it. What do you stand for? What problem do you solve? What outcome do you deliver? Repeat it relentlessly. The man who controls the narrative controls perception, and perception becomes reality in markets. Now let's address the enemy most men never defeat: comfort. Comfort is seductive. It whispers that you've earned rest, that you've proven yourself, that you can slow down. This is when decay begins. Machiavelli warned that states collapse, not from invasion, but from internal weakness. Your discipline must outlast success. When things get easier, you must voluntarily make them harder. Train when you don't need to. Study when others coast. Build when others consume. This is how you stay ahead of those chasing you, because someone always is. Another truth: you cannot scale everything yourself. Delegation is not weakness, it is intelligence. A prince who insists on doing everything controls nothing. Your task is vision, direction, and decision. Execution belongs to systems and people. But choose carefully. Machiavelli advised rulers to judge men by results, not words. Loyalty without competence is dangerous. Competence without loyalty is lethal. Balance both. Now comes the final psychological shift: detachment. You must detach from outcomes, not from ambition, but from emotional dependence on results. When you stop needing validation, you become unstoppable. Loss becomes data. Failure becomes feedback. Criticism becomes noise. This emotional independence is the highest form of power. It allows you to act decisively, without fear of judgment. Machiavelli admired leaders who could act coldly when circumstances demanded it, not cruelly, coldly. Clarity over comfort. At this stage, wealth becomes inevitable, not because you chase it, but because your systems demand it. Money flows toward structure, toward discipline, toward leadership. And finally, you must understand this. True power is not domination over others. It is self-command. If you cannot control your impulses, your schedule, your attention, you will never control outcomes. The man who conquers himself cannot be conquered. This is the end game, not luxury, not status, sovereignty. The ability to choose your life deliberately, to act without asking permission, to move without fear, to build without apology. Machiavelli never promised happiness. He promised effectiveness, and effectiveness creates freedom. If part 1 taught you how to rise and part 2 taught you how to remain standing, then the final chapter awaits. Because the last law of power is not ambition, it is legacy. And that is where princes become dynasties.